1987, Garden Lodge, London. Freddie Mercury stood in front of his dressing room mirror, pulling on white silk gloves with deliberate precision. The tuxedo that had been tailored just weeks ago already hung slightly loose on his diminishing frame. Outside, the tabloids were circling like vultures, measuring the hollows of his cheeks with cruel mathematical precision. Tonight was the Royal Opera Gala at Covent Garden, where London's high society would gather in furs and diamonds, where photographers would be waiting to capture proof of his decline, where a diagnosis he hadn't named publicly would be tested against his legendary Defiance. Most people facing private terror would have stayed behind iron gates, but Freddie Mercury was not most people. "You don't have to go, Fred," Mary Austin whispered from the doorway, seeing the exhaustion he tried to hide. Freddie met his own eyes in the mirror, straightening his posture, tilting his chin to that perfect, arrogant angle he'd perfected over 2 decades of commanding stages. "If I don't go, Mary," he said quietly, "the whispers win. They want to see a victim, but I am Freddie Mercury, and a Mercury does not hide. He shines until the very last spark." What happened that night, particularly the moment when a journalist screamed, "Are you dying?" in front of 100 cameras, would become a masterclass in dignity under fire, a lesson in how to face the end without surrendering your power. This is the story of the night Freddie Mercury walked into a lion's den wearing silk gloves and came out with his soul intact. London in 1987 was a city of long shadows and sharp whispers. For Freddie Mercury, the walls of his sanctuary at Garden Lodge in Kensington had become both fortress and witness to a change he wasn't yet ready to name to the world. The beautiful house he'd filled with art and antiques and cats and carefully chosen treasures, the home he'd built as physical proof that Farrokh Bulsara from Zanzibar had made it, had become the place where he was learning to live with fear. The tabloids had turned predatory. They weren't writing about music anymore. They were circling, watching, measuring. Every photograph was analyzed for evidence. Every canceled appearance became proof. The headlines had shifted from celebration to speculation to something that felt like hunting. Freddie's gaunt appearance shocks fans. Queen star's dramatic weight loss raises questions. What's wrong with Freddie Mercury? They knew something was wrong. They didn't know what, but they knew, and they were watching him like scientists studying a specimen, waiting for the moment when he would break down and confirm their suspicions. Most people in Freddie's position, facing the private terror of a diagnosis that felt like a death sentence in 1987, when AIDS was still a mystery wrapped in stigma, and fear would have retreated, would have chosen the comfort of shadows, the safety of privacy, the dignity of silence. But Freddie Mercury had spent his entire life refusing to be what other people expected. He wasn't about to start now. It was a Friday evening in late autumn. The invitation to the Royal Opera Gala at Covent Garden had been sitting on his desk for weeks, an elegant card with embossed lettering requesting the pleasure of Mr. Freddie Mercury's company at a benefit performance for the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, the heart of London's cultural establishment, where dukes and duchesses and wealthy patrons gathered to demonstrate their refinement, where the dress code was strictly enforced, where appearances mattered almost as much as the art itself. It was exactly the kind of event that someone trying to hide an illness would avoid. Too public, too formal, too many photographers, too many opportunities for the mask to slip, which was precisely why Freddie decided to go. "You don't have to do this, Fred," Mary Austin said, standing in the doorway of his dressing room at Garden Lodge. She was the one person who saw him when the lights were off, who knew about the fatigue that settled into his bones the moment he thought no one was watching, who understood the cost of maintaining the performance. They'd been friends for 17 years, lovers once, soulmates always. She knew him better than anyone knew when he was genuinely confident and when he was performing confidence, when his smile was real and when it was armor. Tonight, she could see, was armor. Freddie stood before his mirror, wearing a tuxedo that had been custom-tailored by one of London's finest clothiers just weeks earlier. It already felt a fraction too loose. His body was changing in ways he couldn't control, the illness, stealing substance, making him smaller, making him visible in ways he'd never chosen. But his face was still beautiful, still striking. The thick, dark mustache that had defined his look throughout the 1980s, The short-cropped hair, the dark eyes that could command stadiums with a glance, all still there, still powerful, even if the face beneath was thinner than it should be. He picked up a pair of white silk gloves, not part of the usual tuxedo ensemble, but Freddie had never been usual. The gloves were elegant, old-fashioned, the kind of detail that added ceremony to the outfit. He pulled them on slowly, deliberately, smoothing the silk over his knuckles with careful precision. "If I don't go, Mary," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive velvet quality that had made him one of rock's greatest vocalists, "the whispers win. They want to see a man hiding. They want to see a victim cowering in his house, proving every assumption they've made." He turned from the mirror to face her directly. "But I am Freddie Mercury, and a Mercury does not hide. He shines until the very last spark." It was a declaration and a decision. He would not give them the satisfaction of his absence. He would not let fear dictate his choices. He would walk into the most public, most photographed, most scrutinized event he could find, and he would be magnificent, because that's what he did. That's who he was. He did something he'd done 10,000 times before. He put on the mask. He straightened his posture back perfectly straight despite the exhaustion. He tilted his chin to that perfect, arrogant angle he'd perfected over 2 decades of performing. He summoned a strength that didn't come from his body anymore, but from his soul. The transformation was remarkable. The tired man in the mirror disappeared. In his place stood Freddie Mercury, rock royalty, cultural icon, someone who belonged at galas and opera houses and anywhere else he damn well pleased. The car ride to Covent Garden was silent. Freddie sat in the back of the limousine with Mary, watching London speed past the tinted windows. The city that had made him a king, the city that was now waiting for him to fall so they could write the final chapter of his story. Except he wasn't going to let them write it. He was going to write it himself. As the limousine approached the Royal Opera House, the world outside transformed. The elegant street was packed with crowds, not just opera patrons, but photographers. Hundreds of them, their cameras creating a wall of lenses, all trained on the cars arriving for the gala. This wasn't the usual excitement of celebrity culture. This was something darker, a morbid curiosity. They weren't looking for a star to admire. They were looking for symptoms to photograph, evidence to confirm the rumors, proof that Freddie Mercury was dying. "Mr. Mercury," the driver said quietly, "we're here." The limousine pulled up to the red carpet. Outside, the scene was chaos, barely contained by velvet ropes and security guards. Flashbulbs were already popping, photographers positioning themselves for the perfect shot, journalists holding microphones and recorders, everyone waiting for the car door to open. Mary Austin squeezed Freddie's hand. "You're sure about this?" Freddie looked at her with eyes that were tired but unafraid. "Absolutely certain, darling." The door opened. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The chauffeur held the door while Freddie prepared to emerge, and the photographers surged forward, pressing against the barriers, cameras raised. Then Freddie Mercury stepped out. The effect was instantaneous and electric. For a moment, the sheer force of his presence seemed to push the crowd back. He was magnificent. The tuxedo was perfect, sharp, tailored, immaculate. The white silk gloves caught the lights. His posture was impeccable, not hunched or defensive, but straight and commanding. His smile was wide and confident, the same smile that had lit up Wembley Stadium. He moved with feline elegance up the red carpet, nodding graciously to the cameras, pausing for photographs with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He looked, in that moment, like exactly what he was, royalty. For the audience reading this, particularly those who remember what it means to keep your head high when your knees want to buckle, who understand the courage required to face the world when everything inside you is breaking, this was a masterclass in dignity. The flashbulbs exploded in a frenzy. The photographers shouted his name, wanting him to turn this way, that way, to capture the perfect angle. But Freddie controlled the moment. He gave them exactly what he wanted to give: confidence, elegance, defiance, and nothing more. He spent the evening inside the Opera House as the perfect guest. The Royal Opera House at Covent Garden was one of London's most prestigious venues, all red velvet in gilded boxes and crystal chandeliers, a temple to high culture that had hosted the world's greatest performances for centuries. Tonight's gala was a benefit, which meant the audience was London's elite, aristocracy, wealthy patrons, cultural luminaries, the kind of people who measured sophistication by how many opera seasons they'd attended and how well they could discuss the finer points of a soprano's vibrato. Freddie moved through this world with complete ease. He laughed with duchesses, discussing the nuances of the soprano's range with genuine knowledge and appreciation. He chatted with critics about the conductor's interpretation. He was charming, witty, engaged everything a gala guest should be. Not once did the mask slip. Not when he felt the fatigue threatening to overwhelm him. Not when he caught people staring, assessing, measuring. Not when he overheard whispered speculations about his health. He was Freddie Mercury, and Freddie Mercury did not break in public. But he knew the real ordeal was waiting outside. As the gala ended and the guests began to spill out onto the pavement, the atmosphere transformed. If the arrival had been controlled chaos, the departure was something else entirely. The paparazzi had multiplied during the performance. Where there had been hundreds before, there now seemed to be thousands of photographers, journalists, camera crews, tabloid reporters, all crushed against the barriers, all desperate for the shot. The quote, the evidence they'd been seeking. They'd watched him arrive, looking healthy and confident. They'd been frustrated by his apparent wellness, by his refusal to look sick, by his elegant defiance of their expectations. And now, as he emerged from the opera house, they became desperate. The security guards tried to maintain order, creating a path from the opera house doors to the waiting limousine. But the crowd surged forward, breaking through the barriers, pressing closer. The flashbulbs became blinding, not individual pops, but a continuous strobe of light that turned the street into a disorienting maze of brightness and shadow. The shouting intensified. Freddie, over here! Freddie, look this way. Freddie, why the weight loss? Freddie, what's wrong? Freddie, is it true? Mary Austin walked beside him, her hand on his arm, trying to shield him from the worst of it. The security guards pushed forward, creating a human barrier. But the questions kept coming, getting more aggressive, more invasive, more cruel. Then a voice cut through the chaos. It belonged to a young journalist, couldn't have been more than 25. His face twisted with desperate hunger for a headline, for the story that would make his career. He pushed through the crowd with the kind of aggressive determination that comes from having nothing to lose. He stepped directly into Freddie's path, blocking the way to the car. His camera operator followed, positioning for the perfect shot. The other photographers, sensing something significant about to happen, swung their cameras toward the confrontation. Everything froze. The crowd went silent. The cameras stopped their frantic clicking for just a moment, waiting. The young journalist took a breath, and then he screamed loud enough to ensure every camera would capture the moment. Loud enough to cut through every noise, loud enough to make sure no one could pretend they hadn't heard. Freddie, stop the lies! Tell the world! Are you dying? Are you actually dying? The words hung in the air like physical objects. They weren't a question, they were an accusation, an intrusion, a violation of the most sacred and private corner of a human being's life. They were designed to shock, to wound, to force a reaction that could be photographed and sold. A hush fell over the sidewalk. Even the other photographers went still, their cameras frozen mid-click. Some looked uncomfortable, recognizing that a line had been crossed. Others leaned forward eagerly, waiting for the breakdown, the tears, the anger that would make tomorrow's front page. Mary Austin felt the blood drain from her face. She reached out instinctively, her hand trembling, wanting to pull Freddie out away to protect him from this cruelty. Security guards moved forward, ready to remove the journalist. But Freddie Mercury stopped them with a single raised hand. He didn't flinch. He didn't look down at the pavement in shame. He didn't turn away or hide his face from the 100 cameras that were now zooming in to capture the moment his spirit broke. Instead, he did something that only Freddie could do, something that would be recounted in music history as one of the most powerful moments of defiance ever captured on film. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, fixing the journalist with a look of such profound, regal disdain that the young man actually took a half step backward. It wasn't anger in Freddie's eyes. It was something far more devastating. It was the look a king gives to a peasant who has forgotten his place. Freddie reached up with one white-gloved hand and adjusted the glove on his other hand, smoothing the silk fabric over his knuckles with careful, unhurried precision. The gesture said everything. I have all the time in the world. Your desperation cannot touch me. I am still in control here. Then he leaned in, bringing his face just inches from the man who had tried to humiliate him. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper, but in the sudden, absolute silence of Covent Garden, it carried like a shout. Darling, Freddie said, and a faint, razor-sharp smile touched his lips beneath his mustache. Even death wouldn't dare come for me without checking my appointment book first. He paused, letting that sink in, his eyes never leaving the journalist's face. And as you can see, he continued, his smile widening into something both devastating and beautiful, I am far too busy being fabulous tonight. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't give them the satisfaction of an angry retort or a tearful exit. He simply turned, his coat fluttering behind him like a cape, and stepped into the waiting limousine with the dignity of a monarch leaving a battlefield he had just conquered. The door closed, the engine started, and as the car pulled away from the curb, the silence left behind on the sidewalk was absolute. The photographers stood frozen, cameras lowered, many of them looking ashamed of what they just witnessed. The young journalist who'd asked the question stood alone in the middle of the street, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. Inside the car, as the flashbulbs became mere flickers in the distance and London's streets began to pass by the windows again, the mask didn't fall immediately. Freddie sat in the darkness, his breath coming in shallow, quiet bursts. His hands rested on his lap, still gloved in white silk. His posture remained straight, but the cost of maintaining it was written in every line of his face. He looked at Mary Austin, and for the first time that night, the rock star was gone. There was only a man who had used every ounce of his remaining life force to protect his honor, his dignity, his right to exist on his own terms. Did I do well, Mary? He asked softly, and there was something vulnerable in the question, the need for validation, for confirmation that the performance had worked, that the armor had held. Mary took his hand, her eyes swimming with tears she'd held back all evening. You were the only king in the room, Freddie, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You always are. Freddie leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. The exhaustion that washed over him was profound, an exhaustion that went deeper than sleep could reach, that came from fighting battles on multiple fronts simultaneously, that accumulated from years of being Freddie Mercury, when sometimes all he wanted was to be Farouk again. But beneath the exhaustion was peace. He knew that the tabloids would still write their stories. He knew that the speculation wouldn't stop. He knew that the disease was a clock that wouldn't stop ticking, that there would be harder days ahead, that eventually the battle would be one he couldn't win. But for tonight, in front of the cameras and the critics and the vultures, he had proven something essential, that a man's worth is not defined by his illness, but by the way he chooses to face it. He had walked into the lion's den wearing silk gloves and a tuxedo. He had let them photograph him, question him, judge him, and he had come out with his soul intact.